In the 1930s, across the American Midwest, entire towns would gather for a brutal public event. Men, women, and children formed human walls across the prairie, walking forward for miles to corner and beat tens of thousands of jackrabbits to death. Around the exact same time, the Australian government decided to tackle their own agricultural pests by deploying the Royal Australian Artillery, soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition officially declared war on emus. To understand why civilized societies resorted to mass extermination, you have to look at the environment they were living in. The Great Depression had already cratered the global economy, and then the sky turned black. The Dust Bowl was suffocating the high plains, ruining the soil and bankrupting families. As the severe drought killed off cash crops like wheat and sugar beets, it created the perfect breeding conditions for desert-adapted animals. The jackrabbits and emus thrived in the dry heat, consuming every last scrap of vegetation and stripping the bark off the few surviving trees. When humans face total environmental ruin, the loss of control is terrifying. Stripped of their livelihoods by an invisible climate disaster, farmers took out their desperation on an enemy they could actually see and hit. The logistics of the Kansas rabbit drives required massive cooperation. During the height of the drought, nearly 100,000 volunteers formed physical chains to drive the animals into custom-built wire pens. They used clubs instead of guns, simply because bullets were too expensive, ultimately killing or capturing over 2 million jackrabbits. What started as grassroots community defense quickly institutionalized. The federal government stepped in, heavily funding animal damage control programs to clear the landscape of predators and pests on behalf of the agricultural industry. The government replaced wooden clubs with industrial chemistry. Federal agents laced animal carcasses with strychnine and deployed Compound 1080, a highly lethal, tasteless poison, to systematically clear millions of animals off the land. Historical records show that these extermination campaigns failed to actually eradicate the target species, despite staggering death tolls and massive influxes of federal funding. In Australia, the emus completely outmaneuvered the military. The birds scattered into small, fast-moving guerrilla units that rendered heavy machine gun fire useless. The military eventually withdrew, leaving the birds to continue eating the wheat. Back in Kansas, the jackrabbit population crashed in the 1980s, but it had nothing to do with the millions of animals beaten to death. Biologists know that jackrabbits operate on a hardwired 7 to 11-year biological cycle of disease and breeding. They vanished because their natural clock ran out. We tend to think that enough money and firepower can solve any problem, but human logistical scale reliably fails when it goes up against the deeply ingrained survival mechanisms of an endemic species. Ecologists call this the resource vacuum. Lethal culling instantly opens a surplus of food and territory for survivors. This Tasmanian feral cat study charts an initial dip after a cull, but with zero competition, the chart shows a rapid, accelerated spike, resulting in more cats. Mass killing also fractures established animal societies. When licensed hunters in Cyprus tried to cull the local hooded crow population to protect game birds, they disrupted the crow's established social structures. The surviving flocks panicked, increased their breeding density, and immediately stabilized their numbers. It even backfires with disease control. In the UK, the government culled wild badgers to stop the spread of bovine tuberculosis to cattle. But hunting the badgers caused the survivors to flee their normal territories, scattering across the countryside and actually spreading the disease to surrounding farms. Extermination operates entirely on human logic. Kill an animal, and you have one less animal. But ecological logic dictates the exact opposite. To an ecosystem, mass death is a biological alarm bell, signaling the survivors to reproduce faster and spread wider. In retrospect, the 1930s rabbit drives functioned as public spectacles of survival rather than sound agricultural science. For communities bankrupted by the weather and choking on dust, clubbing jackrabbits offered a rare, tangible victory. It was a way for desperate people to stand shoulder to shoulder and exert power over a landscape that was otherwise destroying them. Modern wildlife management takes a very different approach. Instead of trying to wipe out a species entirely, conservation departments use highly specific hunting seasons and bag limits, the exact number of animals a person is allowed to take, to gently shape a population without triggering a chaotic biological rebound. This aligns with a concept known as One Health, which treats human, animal, and environmental well-being as deeply connected. Today, managers use exclusion fencing and targeted fertility control to keep an animal population below an ecosystem's carrying capacity, the maximum number of animals the land can naturally support. The math backs this up. Studies on wild boars and white-tailed deer show that combining fertility control with limited, targeted management cuts the time it takes to stabilize a disruptive population in half compared to lethal culling alone. Long-term stability requires understanding the complex, hardwired cycles of the environment rather than attempting to conquer them through unilateral violence. Integrating human cultivation with these natural biological laws creates the only sustainable path forward.